The Byzantine Empire is the heir to the Roman Empire and that ruled the Mediterranean for 400 or 500 years. And in fact, they call themselves the Roman Empire. They followed an Orthodox Christianity, which is distinct from Western Roman Christianity. In both Eastern and Western Christianity, religious controversies, religious discussion, the religion was used to not only undermine the state at times, but also to support the imperial institutions. The Patriarch of Constantinople, in the old city of Byzantium, crowned Byzantine emperors. Since 391, when Christianity became the official religion of the empire, other heresies, other sects, other pagan groups were persecuted and outlawed. They were actually labeled to be demented and insane. You had these churches. The patriarchs were found in various parts of the Eastern Empire, in Alexandria, in Egypt, in Jerusalem, in Antioch, and of course in Constantinople. The church received a great deal of financial and political support from the state and from generous, pious donors. So in a way, the church became almost a welfare agency for the state. The clergy, there were many, many clergy, the ranks of the clergy were swelling. The clergy almost acted as state officials in this regard. When one studies the history of Byzantium in the early Middle Ages, it almost has this sort of religious studies flavor. It's about heresies, and it's really about invasions. Invasions by the Slavs, invasions by the Arabs, invasions by the Avyars, but also religious controversy. In the 6th century, under the Emperor Justinian and his wife, the Empress Theodora, Justinian's main plan was to reconquer the western parts of the empire, but there was a very controversial religious belief, religious doctrine known as the Monophysite controversy. In the Monophysite heresy, which was supported by the Empress Theodora, it was a Christological debate about the nature of Christ. The Monophysites believed that in the person of Christ, Christ was essentially an eternal God, only in one person, and not the sort of transcendent eternal God and mortal man together as one. And this is a belief that was adopted by the Copts, the Coptic church in Egypt, by Syrians, and even by the Armenian church. In Byzantine Christianity, there is this goal to preserve the sovereignty of Christ. And so to the Monophysites were a threat. And this is why it wasn't going to be supported. There was another heresy that dealt with, this was a discussion on the nature of the Trinity. The Philokae controversy. And in the Philokae controversy, it was a debate over whether the Holy Spirit proceeded from the Son, Philokae only, or from the Father and the Son. And the Western Church said it proceeded from both the Father and the Son, whereas the Eastern Church said it just proceeded from the Father. And this, again, very, very controversial, hurt relations with the two churches. And I think there's more at stake here than just religious doctrine. But it had to do with preserving the majesty and the integrity of the imperial crown, because the emperor was a representative of God on earth. And so any threat to the unity of God was seen as a threat to the unity of the imperial state, and this is why it was actually quite dangerous. In the 8th century, under the Emperor Leo III, you have this iconoclastic controversy. Iconoclasm was an assault on the veneration of images, which is quite surprising since the veneration of images was allowed up to that point. It was seen as being sacrilegious. It was seen as being a sin to venerate icons. This may have been an attempt to rein in the power of the monasteries and the convents. It may have been to accommodate the sensitivities of the Arabs, whom the Byzantines have been at war up to this point. But it definitely hurt relations with the Western Church, because the Western Church condemned iconoclasm, and it kind of forced the popes into the protection of the Franks, first the Merovingians and then later the Carolingians. Although the veneration of icons would be restored in the 9th century, the damage was done because a lot of art was destroyed during the iconoclastic period. In addition to this, there are a number of trivial and not so trivial differences between the two churches. The Eastern Church doesn't believe in purgatory. The Eastern Church allowed priests to be married. Bishops could not get married, but priests could get married. The Eastern Church, there was a discussion over whether the Eucharist bread should be leavened or unleavened. And also, the Eastern Church allowed the use of the vernacular languages. So what you have in the Eastern Church is you have the emergence of these national churches, the Greek Church, the Bulgarian Church, the Russian Orthodox Church, the Serbian Orthodox Church, as opposed to the West, where you have a kind of a universal single church using a single language, Latin. So all of these religious controversies sort of come to a fore in 1054 when the representative of the Pope, Cardinal Humbert, goes to Constantinople to reconcile these differences and meets with the Patriarch Michael Cerularius. The meeting doesn't go very, very well, and before the cardinal departs, he leaves a bull of excommunication on the altar of the great church of Hagia Sophia. In return, the Patriarch excommunicates the Pope and says the popes have been heretics, the Western popes have been heretics for several centuries. And so this division becomes permanent in the 11th century, and there has been no unification of the churches since that time.